want to begin this sermon by sharing a few stories with you. The first you may be familiar with. Philemon and Bacchus had lived long, good lives within their very modest means. But Jupiter, the Roman king of the gods, had heard of this virtuous couple. Based on all his previous experience with humans, though, he had serious doubts as to their goodness. In fact, Jupiter was considering a plan to destroy all of humankind, but was willing to give it one final shot with these two. So Jupiter and his son Mercury disguised themselves as worn and weary travelers and went from house to house among the neighbors of Philemon and Bacchus. As they expected, the neighbors turned them away rudely. Then they arrived at the last house, or rather, the last shack of Philemon and Bacchus. The couple were pleased to have visitors and quickly invited them to come inside and rest. They piled more of their very precious firewood onto the hearth to make sure that the travelers were comfortable. Before Jupiter or Mercury could mention that they were hungry, the hosts brought out fresh fish, fruits, olives, eggs, and wine. And the couple noticed something very strange was going on. No matter how often they poured from it, the wine pitcher never seemed to get empty. They began to suspect that their guests might be more than mere mortals. Just in case, Philemon and Bacchus decided to provide as close as they could a meal fit for the gods. That would require killing their one goose, but it was much, much faster than this elderly couple. But eventually they got the goose cornered in the little cottage, and just as they were about to pounce and catch it, the goose jumped into Jupiter's lap. To save the poor goose, Jupiter and Mercury revealed themselves and immediately expressed their pleasure in meeting an honorable human like this couple. The gods were so grateful for the warm hospitality that they told Philemon and Bacchus that they could have anything they wished for. The couple said they wished to become temple priests, where they could always be in a position of welcoming travelers and then to eventually die together. Their wish was granted, and when they died, they were turned into intertwining trees. Another story that is likely less familiar to you. Once upon a time, in a very different place, in Hawaii, as a matter of fact, the goddess of fire, Pele, often disguised herself as an old, feeble woman. And I don't know if we can still use this word, but the story calls her a hag. This particular day, Pele had a secret mission, taking a gnarled old koa tree branch for a cane. She trudged down the mountainside. Finally, she came to the spot she was looking for, an area where a couple of houses in very different conditions stood. The first was a sizable house, well built. The one window overlooked their lovely crops of taro and rows of tasseled coconut palms and fruit-laden banana trees that were bending over under their weight. Pele, in her disguise, noted these growing crops and then grasped her cane, hobbling slowly toward the threshold. "Aloha," she said to a small group sitting in the doorway. "Aloha," they mumbled in reply. Pele waited. There was no invitation to enter or refresh herself. "I've walked many miles," she said. "I'm very hungry. Perhaps you have maybe just a calabash of poi for me." "We're very sorry, but we're all out of poi, and besides, the evening meal is finished," they said. She asked for maybe some salted fish or some berries, but there were no fish and the berries were still green, they told her. Now Pele suppressed the flashes of fiery anger that ordinarily blazed within her, and she hunched over and moved on to the next garden gate. Next, she came across the second smaller house, shack, less manicured. She paused at the threshold of this small hut. The work of the day was done, and so was the dinner. She said, I can see your evening meal has passed. I'm so sorry to bother you, but I am tired and hungry and hoped for a little bit of refreshment. I'm so sorry. We are out of fish and berries, the family said, but you are welcome to what we do have. And before he had concluded his words, the farmer's wife rose and motioned Pele to a mat to make herself comfortable and delivered a fresh bowl of poi. Pele dove in without hesitation, devoured one bowl, and then devoured a second bowl, and devoured a half of a third bowl. This was a suspiciously large amount of food for a tiny, frail, older woman. Finally, halfway through the third calabash of poi, she arose to her feet, paused, and uttered these words, "When your neighbors plant taro, it shall wither to the stem. Your neighbor's bananas shall hang as green fingers upon the stalk, and coconuts shall fall on his favorite pig. But when you plant taro, you may pull it the very next morning. Your cane shall mature overnight, and your bananas ripen in one day's sunshine. You will have as many crops as there are days of the year." Saying these words, Pele trudged out the gate and was seen to disappear. The very next morning, as the sun rose, the fishermen found that their fortunes had in fact turned. His yard was lush and ripe, full of yellow bananas and mature taro. Looking across at his rich, stingy neighbor, he saw that the curse of Pele had descended upon him. A third story I will only summarize because it's basically exactly the same. In a tale from Kurdistan, a poor man and his wife are lamenting their poverty when a stranger appears to them asking for straw. The couple gladly gives this traveler some straw. The line that I love from this story is, after the stranger had left, the husband said to the wife, "Look how rich we are. There are people who do not even have straw, and we are rich compared to them." The next morning, the remainder of the straw in their possession was transformed miraculously into silver and gold, and the couple realized that the beggar had been the prophet Elijah. In the ancient world, and I suppose in Hawaii and in Kurdistan as well, there were deep societal expectations of how travelers should be treated. It was a matter of human survival, after all. The wilderness was quite dangerous, and people one met on the road, especially at night, could be quite dangerous. This shared expectation of hospitality just made sense for human thriving. This week I had 3 different conversations that reminded me a bit about how fickle life can be, how precarious our situations are, even though we don't like to admit it. One conversation was spending a couple of days with the United Way this week. It was a big meeting about changing the narrative around homelessness. One of the big takeaways, and something we really got from the people who were experiencing homelessness that came to speak with us, is how close many, many people are to falling into financial ruin these days. Without multiple layers of safety net, which many people don't have, it only takes a job loss or an injury or a family crisis for good people's lives to be completely unraveled. This is part of why we blame people experiencing homelessness and see their situation as personal failure. Because the reality that it could happen to us just as well is terrifying. But it does happen to good, hardworking people every day. Another conversation I had about the precarious, unfair nature of life was with Lynn Cowan just yesterday. We were talking about family history after the memorial service, looking at old pictures and the desire to learn more about where we come from. She told me about the hardship of her family's immigration story from Eastern Europe. They sent one son to work in the Philadelphia area in mining or whatever grueling hard work they could find, for him to save up a little bit of money to send home so that they could afford to send another son to join him in that mining, grueling, hard, dangerous work, so they could save up a little bit more money to bring back another of their brothers to come and join them in that ridiculously hard labor. In the story, and sharing that story, we were reminded, also hearing the stories about World War II and those sacrifices that we heard about yesterday, reminded of the sacrifices that many immigrant families make and the unfathomable work that they must do that is really hard for a lot of us to grasp our heads around these days. The last conversation I had was with my best friend from college. He was in town to catch up, so we had dinner for about 4 hours. He's that kind of friend where we know each other's extended families. We know each other's aunts and great aunts and each other's cousins. And as our own parents enter their late 70s, we reflected on the uncertainty of long-term health. Some of our elders in our two families, the ones who have had the hardest lives and been the roughest on their bodies in really bad ways, seem to be the longest lived. Health and disease are ridiculously unfair, we decided. But still, most of the time, we go about our days with the temptation to compare each other. And by compare, I mean rank. We wring our hands and think, oh God, I wish I could be like Susan or Bob. Or conversely, oh, here come Bob and Susan. What is wrong with them? But the secret is we are all trying our best. Some people start with a leg up. Some people's brains are wildly fast, and they hold information like a steel trap. Ugh, to be like one of them. Or what about the beautiful people? Some people are born with perfectly proportional facial features, bodies that naturally shed fat and easily gain muscle, teeth that are straight as graph paper and just as white. Why can't I be one of those people? Our faith invites us into a different story, though. Bob and Susan may be great people, but they are no more worthy than you or I. They are no less worthy than you or I either. Actually, Bob and Susan and Frank and Kent and Kathy and the 80 other people in this room and the 39 million people in California are just people doing their best. I had fun this week looking at folk tales and biblical stories about hospitality. I had heard of unknowingly entertaining angels as a story, but I didn't realize these stories were so ubiquitous. All around the world, people needed to be reminded of this core function of humanity, to help a traveler in need. It wasn't just about being nice or having the latest recipe or putting your beautiful decor on display. I imagine in the context of those stories, hospitality really was about survival for travelers. Traveling in the ancient world was dangerous. Being an elder in an agricultural society would have been very dangerous without family to help. Thank goodness they built in these expectations for people to help one another. But I am here to remind us, friends, that we are not as removed from our ancestors or the wisdom of their stories as we might think. We may not be traveling on foot through the desert, but most of us are geographically isolated from our family, our tribes. Most here in South Orange County in the 21st century are nomads, navigating a very different terrain, a sort of suburban wilderness, if you will, a digital wilderness. And though it may appear safe and easy, many of our neighbors are a paycheck or a medical crisis away from missing their rent or their mortgage. In this pretend paradise, there is still tremendous insecurity. Those stories, those warnings about hospitality have not expired. Hospitality, as we know, often involves sharing a place to rest or sharing a meal, but it's more than about eating. Hospitality is an offer to identify with the outsider and to treat them as an insider, as one of us. Hospitality is extending privileged access across difference. It's offering the life-sustaining warmth of community to those who are vulnerable because they are strangers. And if you haven't caught on yet, we each have been and will occasionally be strangers in the wilderness. We each have been and received hospitality 1,000 times, and we've offered it to others as well. We are the lucky ones, because we have here in our faith community an opportunity to exercise exactly the type of hospitality that is called for in our world today. This small but mighty congregation welcomes in folks who may be feeling alone, disconnected from their extended family by geography or by broken ties. We welcome in parents who need a village to help raise their amazing kids. We welcome in folks who are struggling to make ends meet financially. At some point, each and every one of us, even me, was welcomed into this tapestry. The blessing is not just that it was here for us in our time of need. The blessing is that we have the opportunity to welcome the traveler ourselves, to welcome the stranger, to provide hospitality for the neighbor, the friend we don't know yet, the angel who comes through our door seeking community and rest here. There is no guest list here. No RSVP is required. Sit by our fire, share a meal. You are welcome, friend, just as you are. Amen.